Good morning. I'm Jacqueline Smith. I'm Associate Vice President of University Initiatives at Arizona State University, and I'll be moderating our fireside chat without a fire today. And in just a moment, I will introduce our guests, but I wanted to offer some remarks about how ASU really appreciates working with like-minded partners. And this event is one of those where we're constantly looking for new ideas, to be connected with other dreamers who share our values, who appreciate and are aligned with our charter and our design aspirations. And the conversation today is really about a belief that by dramatically improving educational attainment globally, we will actually change the trajectory of global economies. So our colleagues will have a bit of a dialogue, and then we'll look to you also for your ideas and input over the course of our session. So first, let me introduce Maysa Jalbout, who's the founding CEO of the Abdulla Ghurair Foundation for Education, the Arab region's largest privately founded philanthropic initiative, with a budget of $1 billion and a mission of rewriting the Arab story through creating educational opportunities for youth. Maysa is also a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., and her extensive international experience has also allowed her to produce highly visible research and thought leadership strategies in fields including refugee education. For her impactful work in the Arab region, Forbes has twice recognized her as one of the most powerful businesswomen in the Arab world in 2016 and 2017. And as many of you know, Michael Crow has been the president of Arizona State University since 2002, and he's guiding the transformation of ASU into one of the nation's leading public metropolitan research universities. And I'll open it up by inviting our guests to say, from your vantage point, what are some of the major challenges that we are facing in this effort of increasing global education attainment, and how are you working to address those challenges? I'll start with Maysa.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for participating in this session, and thank you for your kind remarks. I think I just wanted to say that it's really important what you just said about sort of shared values and the fact that I'm here on this panel with Michael, and the fact that in a very short period of time, ASU has become our largest partner in the foundation. And it's sort of an unlikely partnership because there was no sort of pre-existing ties, but I think what brought us together is this idea that in a world that's full of challenges, and especially in the education sector, what's really important is that you create higher education opportunities that are about inclusivity as opposed to exclusivity. And that's kind of why we started working together. For us as a foundation, our mandate is to support young people who really desire the opportunity to continue their education but don't have the means for many different circumstances, which I think we'll get into here a bit today. So the challenges in the Arab world are not unlike the challenges in the global community around higher education. It's just that they happen to be more acute in several circumstances. The first is around access. So we've made a lot of progress in the region around access, much like we have globally, but what we're finding is that it's still not equal access for all young people. So it's very much an equity challenge. So in the region, it's more, if you come from a privileged background, you are 3 times more likely to get a higher education than if you were to come from the lowest economic tier. And so obviously that's a challenge that we face globally, including here in the US. The second is around quality. So quality now is perhaps the #1 challenge to higher education and relevance to the job market. And we're in the 4th industrial revolution, and the biggest question I face all the time being a foundation that's supporting higher education is it relevant? Is it going to give those young people you're investing in results, or should you be doing other things that support them sort of in faster ways to get into the employment market? So it's a very big challenge, the issue of quality. And then the third one, and that's really close to my heart and at the crux of what's sort of challenging the education system in the Arab world, and of course now it's become also a global problem, is conflict. So you have the regular challenges that you're facing in higher education throughout the world, but then you have these huge disrupting factors such as conflict, which is essentially now robbing young people from the opportunity to continue their education. And we're struggling a lot with how do you innovate in a very structured system of higher education to extend to young people that don't really fall within either the mandate or the regular business stream. So those are just some of the challenges. There are many more, but
yeah, I think what I would add from a challenge perspective is that academia globally is seriously flawed by two fundamental issues. The first is academic culture itself. Unfortunately, Plato's logic of the three types of individuals in society is too much of a pervasive element in the design of academia, where there were philosopher kings, who were better than anyone else and who had all insight. There were guardians who would be the implementers of the ideas of the philosopher kings, and then there was everyone else who were interested mostly in food and sex. This is his words, not mine. And so that's kind of a harsh analysis of what, the way the world is shaped. And so academia still has too much of that, in my view. As a culture, it's still too much built around the notion of we educate the worthy, we educate the smart, we educate the gifted, we build excellence as the measure of exclusion as opposed to impact. And so this is a cultural problem. And so what you see happen around the world at universities around the world, it doesn't make any difference where they are. And I've been to 40 or 50 different countries and been to universities in all those countries, and it's always the same. So you go to some tiny little country with 10 million people, and they say, well, we're the MIT of. And we admit, we have the highest admission standards, and we have this and this and this, and only the best and the brightest. And so it turns out that, yes, there are best and brightest students in some things, and the next person over is best and brightest in something else, and then something else, and then something else, and then something else. And that model of academic elitism isn't conducive to the long-term evolution of egalitarian access to higher and higher levels of education. Right now we have a system which is designed to operate as a funnel. Teach everyone to read, teach everyone some basic rudimentary skills, select the best of them, teach them a little bit more, select the best of them, teach them a little bit more, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know where we became fixated on exclusion as the measurement of success, but that's where it sits. The second thing beyond academic culture is the design of the institutions themselves. So they're designed very much more like religious organizations than they are designed like complex, adaptive, high-speed, socially engaged, transformative institutions. And it might be that some of them have to maintain their structure and their design as these rigid bureaucracies, these academic bureaucracies, slow to change, argumentative, not really interested in the broader social transformation issue. So let's take the issue of refugees. Millions and millions of people have their lives and have had their lives disrupted through political actions or natural disasters that they didn't contribute to. Their families are disrupted, their children's education are disrupted, and it is basically not possible for most institutions of education to respond. Well, it requires immediate response. They can't do that. It requires deployed response. They can't do that. It requires culturally adaptive response. They can't do that. And so I can go through this whole list of the things that the present design of institutions of education can't do. And so to me, the challenge is that we have a deep cultural issue in the way specifically higher education is culturally constructed, and then we have these design issues. So we have not built adaptive organizations. We've not built organizations that have the capacity to truly understand egalitarianism, to truly understand what it takes for a democracy to evolve. So let's take one example. So in the U.S., one of the methods by which democracy has advanced has been universal education for the first few years of life. Let's say up through 17 or 18. Only 16 in the United States, because you can drop out of high school by your own choice with your own decision as a 16-year-old, which seems basically asinine to me, but nonetheless you can do that. But having said that, that universal education led to transformative outcomes in the society. But universal education stops at teenager. Why? Universal education has probably never been more important across the entirety of a person's life. And only a handful of the traditional colleges and universities in the country see that or can really fully grasp that. And so from my perspective, the challenges at the root of this educational dilemma are the design of academia and the academic culture that is pervasive. And Maysa, you and I know that there's even folks in some of the places that we're working together who are basically saying, well, if it's technology-driven learning, it can't be any good. And based on what, we don't know that they say that, but nonetheless, that's the inherent assumption.
So you mentioned this need for a mindset shift, particularly around digital education. Maysa, your foundation has made significant investments and is looking to make online education more accessible. And one of the ways you're doing that is a partnership with ASU and the Open Learning Scholars Program. What is it about online education that makes you want to help advance it? Why is the foundation making those investments? And what kind of mindset shifts are necessary in order to make digital education more accepted in the region?
So I alluded to it earlier in that we are very concerned around how we get higher education to be more accessible for young people who don't fit into the mainstream type education. So that's definitely one of our reasons or rationale for why we would want to push it. So refugees in particular, or rural communities, or just people who are deep in poverty and aren't able to physically attend a university. That's the basic motivation. But it has evolved in the 2 years that we've been working to be not just for those young people who are disadvantaged, but ideally what we would like to see is to use online learning to help shift the approach or thinking to higher education. As Michael said, the idea of elitist education, or higher education specifically, is not unique to the top 20 universities in the world, or we're seeing that very much in the region. So we're seeing very high quality universities who have built sort of a fort around them, saying that they will only accept the top students that come from privileged backgrounds in many ways because they come from the best high schools and families and so on and so forth. And that's sort of been the accepted approach in society, is that the more elitist you are, the more you're seen to be delivering a higher quality education. And with online learning, it sort of disrupts all of that. And it makes people feel uncomfortable. And I've had many very frank conversations with presidents of universities in the region that have told me that they're very interested in doing that, but they're not sure how this affects their business model. And of course, they have to deal with accreditation processes with governments that are not necessarily yet open to the idea of online learning because they don't know how to evaluate it, they don't know how they're going to control it in some ways. And it creates sort of a new approach that doesn't just, it forces the traditional system to not just innovate, but it throws open the quality of the education or the courses that are being offered for the world to see, and that's very scary. So some of the opportunities that we're seeing, we're working with ASU. We're now offering to our students from anywhere in the Arab world access to 28 master's degrees, and we're working with some of the governments to accredit those, and we've had to do, along with you guys, some very basic things such as, bring them to ASU and have them evaluate course by course. And we're hoping that we've got accreditation from one government, the government of Dubai. We're hoping that will translate into more openness by other governments. So there's a lot of groundwork to do. Another opportunity is where universities themselves partner up with other universities that are working in the online space to accredit some of the high quality courses. So we've had somewhat of a breakthrough between the American University of Cairo and MIT, where now you can have a joint degree. We're hoping to see some of those types of things get a bit more traction. But perhaps the most important opportunity is slight openness among some of the faculty members within the region to start thinking about their responsibility towards providing their education opportunities to more students in the region. And so we're working with them to develop their capacity to put their courses online. And I think that's where we're going to have the, the highest level of impact. We'll be doing a lot more of that work.
Michael, when you came to ASU, Engage Globally was one of the design aspirations. The institution has evolved significantly. Our technological assets have strengthened, especially in recent years. What would you say have been some signals that ASU is able to engage globally at a more mature pace and on more sophisticated projects? What has enabled us to perform more recently?
Well, the enablement of the performance for us has been the changing in the culture. So we have, quote unquote, an elite faculty, which is different than an elite student body. An elite faculty means they're at the top of their game. They're fantastic in their individual fields. They can contribute knowledge to their fields. Elite status is gained by your performance, not by how few of you there are. It's a different kind of measure. And so we have an elite faculty who are now responsive in real time to real challenges. So we have belief that there's ways in which we can use technologies to greatly enhance the educational outcome of the students coming to be educated with us physically. And so sure enough, we've seen massive improvement in our retention rate and our graduation rate. We've seen a rapid expansion of our student body into all socioeconomic groups. We've seen a massive diversification of our student body. 50% of our 12,000 freshmen on campus are from non-European backgrounds. That's a tremendous change in the way the institution is operating. So what we found, and I think what's happened here, is that our faculty, an elite faculty equal to the elite faculty at any other university, now has been empowered by culture change, has been empowered by design status. That is, they can design their programs now, they can evolve their schools. They've been empowered by technology. And with that, that means that we can sit in a room and say, gee, we'd like to figure out how to engage with refugee communities in Jordan with educational content at scale. Or, gee, we're working with some friends in the Middle East who are interested, as we are, in finding new ways to expand STEM education across a complex region of the world where educational attainment may contribute to enhanced social outcomes and enhanced economic outcomes. And so in doing that, what we find now is that we are able to do that in real time. And we're able to do it in real time because of the change in culture, the change in purpose, and the empowerment of technology, as well as our deep commitment to what we call accessibility. So we've tried to construct an institution which is simultaneously excellent, that is, everything we offer, our online degrees. We wouldn't put our name on these degrees if we didn't think that they were as good or better than anything else that we're doing. So academically excellent, at the same time accessible, reaching learners everywhere, different types of learners, different communities of learners, and then impactful. The third thing is impact. That what we do leads to social transformation, leads to social change, leads to social justice, leads to egalitarian outcomes. And so if you start running a university like ours with 20,000 employees and hundreds of thousands of learners and every technological tool that humans have ever built, well, you'll start to have an impact on the outcomes of lots of lives.
Maysa, for those in the audience who may want to learn a little bit more about the Arab region, the educational landscape, can you spend a couple of minutes sharing just the size and scope of the challenge that you're really working on? You are delivering programs to Emiratis in the UAE, but you've also, as a foundation, made a commitment to the region. So what does that mean to take on a regional commitment?
It means it's hugely challenging. So when people in this part of the world look at the Arab world, they might think of it as just one homogeneous place, but it isn't. It's 22 different Arab states. So there are very unique challenges to each country, and we've made a commitment to work in all of those countries. The common factor between all the young people is that they're bright and they're disadvantaged. In the UAE context, that's a little bit different because the government there has a lot of resources and is quite generous with its people. So we're looking at sort of tackling different challenges, more around innovation and connection to the job market. But in the region, you might all know that we're We're the youngest region in the world. We also have the highest youth unemployment rate in the world, close to 30%. And our enrollment rates in higher education are lower than the global average. So we're sitting at 28%, and I think the global average today is 35%. And this is, not to compare to OECD levels or others. So we've got a long way to go. But I think what's most challenging in that, and which really sort of pushes the question of is higher education the right pathway or the right investment for governments in the region, is the fact that something like the concentration levels of unemployment among Arab youth who have a higher education is 40%. I mean, that really puts into question why is that happening? And so there is the issue of, is higher education responding to the needs of the market? Is it emphasizing quality, or is it just producing, young graduates without any regard to their future? So those are some of the challenges. The other one I would say I already emphasized, refugees, but it's important to say that 50% of the refugee population in the world resides in the Arab world. So among the young people that we're trying to serve, 80% of those who are not in school come from conflict-ridden countries. So it's a huge issue for the region to tackle. And now it transcends borders. So Syrians are everywhere in the region, Yemenis, Palestinians, Iraqis, Libyans. It's no longer something that's confounded to one country. So it's become a regional challenge. And I don't know of a country that's not in the region that's not engaged in it. So those are some of the challenges. But I don't want to talk about just challenges,
Sure.
right? So I think there are lots of opportunities. That's why we exist as a foundation. We think the solutions are close at hand and are achievable, and we're looking to create partnerships like the ones that we've created with ASU to help solve some of those problems. That's why we're investing in online learning. But we're also looking at how you solve the problem at its root. And so we're, for example, just did a really important study where we surveyed young people themselves to get their perspective on the education that they're receiving. And it's a first of its kind study. Usually you survey employers, and we already know what employers think. Most of them think that universities aren't producing good graduates. But what we found out was that young people are actually a lot more aware than we give them credit about the importance of the quality of their education, and particularly they're particularly concerned about the fact that they don't get much experience in their higher education. So they were, something like 97% said that the purpose of them going into higher education is to prepare them for their careers. That's outstanding, and actually to me that's very promising. 9 out of 10 said that they want internships and experiences as part of their higher education. 2/3 of them said they've never had any form of counseling, which of course for us says that, yes, we need to invest in higher education, but we actually need to start working with kids when they're much younger. And this is why we've developed a new program called the Young Thinkers Program, in which ASU's developed an online portal for us to provide those kinds of advice and information and skills development opportunities early on. We don't have a lot of time to go into it, but it's a unique model. It's the first of its kind, probably not just the region, but anywhere else. And we're looking to deploy this right across the region. And we're very excited about it, and we think that it's going to generate a lot more opportunities to connect with kids directly, not just necessarily through the education system, which I think often acts as a barrier.
Michael, what role is ASU playing in working with universities globally that are trying to transform, that are trying to be more design-oriented, that are looking to empower their faculty in new ways? I know we're involved in projects in Egypt and Saudi Arabia, but really in a variety of places around the world with these emerging models. What's ASU's role, and what are your impressions of those who are trying to do things differently?
Well, there are folks that are trying to build new universities from scratch, and so they're looking for new designs, and so we're working in Morocco, we're working in Egypt, we're working in a few other places at the conceptual level and the design level. Then there are universities around the world, in Ghana, in Palestine, in Pakistan, in Saudi Arabia, and other places where we're working in partnership modes, where we're thinking about how to evolve universities. In the United States, we're working with dozens and dozens and dozens of universities in sort of a different range of things, from leadership academies to innovation alliances. We have an innovation alliance that I'm the chairman of that involves 10 other major research universities: Ohio State, Purdue, Michigan State, Texas, Kansas, schools like that, large public research universities where we're learning how to innovate together. That's been the problem. Every little pipsqueak university that's out there, what I mean by pipsqueak means small, isolated. They may not be small, but they just try to solve everything on their own. We need to figure out how to solve things together, innovate together, work together, advance together. And so we've got alliances that we're working on. We've got clusters of universities that we're working with. We've got leadership academies and ranges of other things that we're doing. And I think the other thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to find a way to demonstrate through our own work at ASU specifically that the logic that big is bad, that a large university is of a lower quality than small colleges or smaller universities, or that a large-scale engineering program isn't as good as, let's say, a smaller-scale engineering program or what have you. The flaw in that logic is that there's no way to solve any of the problems that the region or the world is facing if the only way to do it is to take a limited set of institutions and a limited set of students and hope that that will solve the problem. You need to be able to deal with scale. You need to be able to deal with speed. You need to be able to deal with diversity. So one of the things that we're doing at our own institution is demonstrating that you can be a major research university with hundreds of millions of dollars a year of research activity and tens of thousands of people involved in research, teaching your students on campus, teaching students online, teaching broader learners globally, working on a range of projects around the world. If we had 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 universities operating at that scale of speed and scale and innovation, the university community itself might be able to be of greater service. And so we're also trying to just demonstrate through our learning outcomes, through our learning assessments, through our tools, through our activities, that you can get very high quality people products and very high quality idea products out of institutions that are different than the classic institutions that have been the kinds of institutions that were successful in the last century and the centuries before that.
Maysa, I'll ask you a question in just a moment, but I want to signal to the audience that we'll start taking some questions soon, and I'll just repeat them for the sake of the video. So start thinking about some of your questions or comments. Maysa, Michael mentioned this idea of making sure that we're more integrated, collaborative, and not working in isolation. How does the foundation identify its partners, and what would you say are some of your strategies to be integrated and collaborative?
So obviously no one organization can solve the kinds of challenges that I've just been talking about, even though we are the largest foundation focused on education, private foundation, in the region. There are lots and lots of other foundations and philanthropic initiatives and NGOs and that are working out there in the region. Some of them very quietly, some of them, for much longer than we have, but a lot of them work individually and in silos, not unlike what you just described in terms of higher education. So part of what we think is an opportunity now is to bring those efforts together. And so we've been spending a lot of time sharing our experiences, but also inviting others to sort of have these very important discussions. And there's a lot of receptivity around that. And similarly, we're now working with 16 universities, mostly in the region, but some in Canada and the US. And a big part of how we selected to work with them was not just the ability to place our students with them, but their also openness to helping us solve some of those problems. So just placing a few students with the universities is really just an entry point into a discussion around what is it that this university does well that we can bring or expand in the Arab world. So as an example, we work with Waterloo University out of Canada, and if you happen to know it, It has a very strong co-op program. So 97% of their students are employed 6 months before they graduate. And that's phenomenal on its own, but for us in the region, it's remarkable, and we're very eager to learn from how do you do that. And so we've been bringing the universities, and starting with discussions by university presidents. We kicked it off actually with Michael, who was the first speaker, but we've since had several of those universities come and talk to the Arab world and connect with the ones that are sort of more open to creating that kind of informally, that coalition of universities to move forward. And then, of course, at the end of the day, you can't do all this without support from government. Mm-hmm. And so we've been talking to a lot of governments, and we've been thinking about how, as a foundation, we add value to the work of government. It is extremely challenging, particularly in a space where institutionalized philanthropy is very new. So a lot of governments don't really know what to do with this sort of external entity that wants to work in a cooperative and in a partnership way. So there's a lot of new to what we're doing, and it makes it challenging but also exciting and rewarding. And I think we're building sort of, as you are building a kind of a new culture for universities, we feel that we're building a new culture of philanthropy. And that sort of leads us to this idea that we're creating a network of philanthropists in the region. And so soon we'll be launching something formal where philanthropists will come together and hopefully not only just share information and knowledge, but perhaps start cooperating around some of these key challenges.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll turn to the audience to see if we have any questions, comments, ideas for Michael and Maysa. Yes, in the front.
So clearly that part of the world, I'm sorry to say this, but there's a strong focus on STEM capabilities, and there's just more disproportionately valued in universities in many countries, and there's a high concentration of those skills. And so I'm wondering how that maps to the kinds of programs that you're offering. And then, of course, to your point of 40% unemployment among college educated, what you see as sort of the next step in terms of segueing those to job opportunities and other sort of broader economic development in the region that creates a pipeline to employment.
So just to reiterate for the video, so it's a two-part question. So it seems like there's a lot of emphasis on STEM in the MENA region, and she's asking if our work together also has a STEM focus. And secondly, she'd like to learn a little bit more about how we're handling those unemployment challenges that were referenced with 40% unemployment rates for college-educated individuals. Maysa, would you like to begin, and then we'll turn to Michael?
Great. So it's a very important question, and there is an emphasis on STEM. But we need to be careful in that an emphasis on STEM does not necessarily mean that we're graduating enough qualified STEM students. So we actually, before we started, we did a study in the region around where are the future of jobs in the next 5 years. Because, if anyone tells you that we know beyond 5 years, they're not really telling the truth. So in the next 5 years, the vast majority of jobs where employers are having a hard time finding Arab qualified students is in the STEM sector. So this is why we're focusing on STEM education. This doesn't mean we have been closed off to anything else. We are funding, and with ASU, some of the degrees that are available are non-STEM, but they're in areas where the region really does need talent. So in education technology, as an example. We're looking at other sectors now, such as the culture sector. It's growing in some parts of the region. And of course, new jobs, data analytics, systems design, supply chain management, all of those things that are extremely important to the new world of work, but are not being taught in the Arab world. So online is a great way for us to provide those opportunities for kids in the region. Having said that, that doesn't solve the school to work transition. There's still a major problem, and where we've identified the best possible solutions is on bringing experience into the higher education sector. So we've been really pushing universities that we're working with and other universities to integrate experience into the university education. So this is why we're looking into co-ops, internships, summer jobs, and entrepreneurship. So in a region like the Arab world, there is no way, even if you have the best higher education experience, that you are going to generate enough jobs for the amount of young people that we have. And so if we sort of flip this very big challenge on its head, you can sort of say that in a world, this part of the world is aging, right? In our part of the world is that we have this massive opportunity to work with a huge pool of young people. And many of those young people increasingly want to be entrepreneurs. In fact, the average age of an entrepreneur in the region is the youngest in the world. I think it's 26. So very young, and more than 60% of entrepreneurs in the region are under the age of 35, if I'm not mistaken. So we're really also looking at how can we support those young people to become entrepreneurs, and that obviously isn't necessarily always about giving them a degree, but it's about connecting them to opportunities, to mentors, to networks, and helping them translate their ideas into sustainable businesses. So lots and lots of stuff to do, and I wouldn't really emphasize the STEM thing because there's also a challenge around the fact that the vast majority of graduates are in humanities, and there's a huge overflood of humanities graduates. So we're not against having students from other sectors, it's just that we're not able to help them get jobs at this time.
So to the career thing second, or the unemployment thing second. So one of the design flaws, even in our own institution, that we're working on but not yet done yet, is that we abandon our product once graduated. They're done. And so we don't stay connected. And so the lack of connection means we're not taking advantage of the fact that we know the humanities majors that we've graduated. I'm speaking more broadly here. We know the engineering graduates that we've graduated. We know the world has a shortage. There's a shortage of college graduates around the planet right now. There's a shortage of college graduates in the American economy. There's all kinds of projects and programs and kinds of things. But because we produce the graduate and then the professor goes back to teaching the next graduate with no concern about where that ultimate graduate ended up, we have a flawed system. So if we had a system wherein we stayed connected to all of our graduates, we worked to network them together, we work to network them with employment opportunities, even ones that aren't local, but are more broad in anything. I mean, so for instance, as we translate all of our materials into Arabic, let's say, well, we should be employing all these recent graduates of in the humanities and other areas in Arabic-speaking and Arabic-trained universities, and then they don't have to live in the United States to do the work. The work is right there. And so the problem that we have is, back to my initial comment, we're just a certain kind of limited scoped factory. Now, we've taken some steps, and Jacqueline, you should describe just quickly for the audience the project that we have in Africa right now, where there are thousands of future leaders that are being educated in the US and Canada, and then as a part of their scholarship, they go back to Africa. So just describe what we're trying to do there. Now imagine this on a bigger scale. Mm-hmm. Every university, every co-op, every person that does an internship is linked and connected, and then they go out into the workforce and how they're connected. So the name of the project and what we're doing.
Sure. So the MasterCard Foundation has invested in thousands and thousands of scholarships for young people across sub-Saharan Africa. And so a few years ago, we built for them an online platform called Baobab. So a baobab is a tree that has roots that are highly dispersed, and it's commonly a meeting point for people. And so Baobab is an online meeting point for all of the scholars. So we have over 3,000 scholars, and we'll grow to 10,000 who are alumni of these programs, who are not receiving support just while they are in school, but are part of a lifelong learning community, where they can continue to work on their soft skills, they can take online courses, and they can connect with each other and form working groups. There are a few colleagues in the room that are working on this project. Bethany Weigel can wave her hand, she's the senior director. We'd be happy to talk with you if you're interested in learning more about how Baobab reaches students from sub-Saharan Africa and how we think this is a model for other communities of scholars.
So imagine every graduate that leaves isn't abandoned by their school. They're still connected, they're still learning, they're still working in networks. And this isn't what one school would do, this is what many schools would do. So we're not just talking about us being the solution. What we're trying to do is to pioneer solutions that get at this issue of, well, why are all these recent college graduates unemployed? And so there may be disruption in the Egyptian economy. There may be disruption certainly in the Yemeni economy or other economies in the region. Well, that doesn't mean that you can't find also solutions, and we just haven't done it. And so finding ways to do it, I think, would be really important. To the STEM thing, yes, the programs some of them have a STEM emphasis that we're working on together. It turns out if you go around the world and you ask first-generation college families, wherever they are, what would you like your son or daughter to be? They'll say, engineer or a doctor, which means the same thing, problem solver, respected problem solver, a person who can solve problems. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to make sure, you'll laugh when I say this, but it might be that everybody should be trained in engineering and something else. And so if we're just producing only engineers, that's probably a mistake. If we're producing engineers who are, socially aware and have some humanities background and understand about the impacts of innovation and culture change and what we call culturally appropriate engineering, well, that might be a way to produce a somewhat broader person capable of engaging on a broader set of problems. And the parents will still be happy because they're an engineer.
Adam.
Hi. With respect to the refugee situation, are you involved in any way with education at a lower level to make sure that the kids, as they enter higher ed, have the background that they need in order to succeed at higher ed?
I'll just repeat the question briefly for the video. So are we building a pipeline? Are we working with others who are preparing the pipeline for primary before the refugee learners move into post-secondary education?
Thank you for the question. 17% of our scholarship students are refugees, and that's actually phenomenal because it's a very competitive process to get that, to get the scholarship. But we feel that that's not enough, and we want to do more. And so soon we will be launching a special initiative focusing on refugee education where there's a really major gap in the international response. And that's particularly on secondary, vocational, as well as partly higher education. So we know that among the Syrian refugee population, for example, only 2% have accessed higher education since the crisis started 7 years ago. But where there's been a complete failure on the part of the international community is in secondary education. So most of the efforts from the donor community have been focused on primary education, as it should be, and there's still a long way to go there. But there's very little for when the student gets into grade 8. So in that 12 plus, everything just really goes downhill. And so we'll be focusing our efforts there, and we'll be trying to help local institutions, NGOs that have succeeded to support refugee populations and their very special needs to scale up. And so I'd love to talk to anyone who's interested in that space.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Pam.
The world seems to be focused very much on girls' education and getting girls into education, but in the Arab world, there's also another challenge, and that is keeping boys in education. In secondary school, keeping boys interested in going on for higher education. Can you say a few words about that?
The question is about keeping boys in school and how and whether the foundation is working on those efforts.
Great. Well, and thank you for the question, because normally I get the opposite, right? You think of the Arab world, you think that, why aren't you doing more to support girls' education? And it's true, the region does need to do more. There are particular countries in which access to education for girls has been challenging. So countries like Yemen, for example, has been one of the most challenging places to achieve gender equality in education. But access, generally speaking, is now becoming a much bigger challenge for boys in certain contexts. So let me just explain. A few years ago, I co-authored a study called the Arab Learning Barometer out of Brookings, the Brookings Institution, and we call this challenge the boomerang effect. So girls have a harder time getting into the education system, but when they do get in, they actually stay longer and do better. So now what we have is a reverse problem. So in a lot of countries, countries like Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, we're now having more women in the higher education sector to the tune of like 50, 60% and more in higher education than we do have men. So what we're seeing, particularly in the more affluent countries is that boys, when they get to high school, they're sort of not necessarily seeing a strong incentive to continue their education, and they're dropping out. In other more kind of unique contexts, such as the conflict, there's a lot of pressure on boys, especially in sort of that teenage years, to go out and work. So when we talk about sort of refugee education, one of the challenges is how do you provide an education that at the same time also deals with the challenge that there's a lot of pressure on young men, whether they're refugees or not, to make money. And so it's now a very unique challenge to the region in some ways, and there's a lot of effort now to focus on the continuation of boys and young adults. But the key, from my standpoint of view, is to connect it to the labor market. And young people need to get a very strong message and strong support to continue their education for the point of view that it will lead to better jobs and better incomes.
Anita, did you have a question? Great. Please.
I have a question about global competence. So, learning online, most students are in touch with your knowledge online, but also preparing for the workforce. What is the focus on global competence skills in all of the SIU or?
Are you saying global competence and digital literacy? Are you asking about?
More about just global competence.
Okay, great.
Collaborating across
Great. So the question is, to what extent is ASU and also the foundation working to build global competency skills? Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I would say not enough. I would say it's an area of inadequate design and poor performance up to this point. I mean, it's taken immense energy just to get to the point where one could teach electrical engineering online, if on a global basis, with students coming in from all over the world. How does one then take advantage of the fact that students are coming in from all over the world to make that global competence a part of the educational experience? And so I see that ASU's provost is here over there, Mark Searle, so I'm sending him telepathic energy. And Leah Lummel is here, who's the COO of Ed Plus at ASU, so I'm sending her telepathic energy saying, that's a really good question. And we don't have a very good answer. So that is something that we should spend more time working on. We do have students at ASU on campus with us from 140 or so countries, more than 13,000 of them. And so we are beginning the process of creating those kinds of experiences in our immersive face-to-face learning environment, but less so in our digital learning environment. So that's something we need to work on, in my view.
So I agree. I mean, I wish we had more disagreement, right? It would make it more interesting for all of you.
We've had disagreements.
Have we?
Yes. I remember one.
But not today, right?
No.
So on global competence, for us, one of the interesting side benefits to young people from the region studying online with young people from around the region is that they do get that interaction and have to cooperate, across cultures and in digital environments, which makes it, a lot more challenging than if you were doing it face to face. But it isn't necessarily the number one criteria. But what's interesting is the private sector is now having an important say in this. A lot of private sector companies in the region, the ones that are growing, they want that competence in the future employees, and they're asking for it. And I think that'll play a big part in how also universities respond to that, because obviously they do want them to be more competitive. And we're seeing that universities that have a more international exposures, they are doing better on employability. So connecting the two, I think, makes a lot of sense.
Great. Well, we're just about at time here, so please join me in thanking the colleagues on the stage.